Good evening, everybody. Yeah, so I'm a business program specialist with USDA Rural Development in Alexandria. We do all of our business programs centrally located out of Alexandria, so we cover the entire state. We have offices in all four corners of Louisiana, but they do mostly community facilities and our housing programs. I'll talk about those briefly as I go through this. I don't want to disappoint anybody, but I probably don't have an hour and 35 minutes worth of material, but I'll answer all questions. I can talk to anybody one-on-one afterwards if you'd like. Anything you want, you can stop me at any time, and we can just talk about things. A little bit about myself. I moved to Alexandria about 3.5 years ago from Los Angeles. I was in the Navy for 9 years. Once I got out, I decided I wanted to continue in federal service because my 9 years will count towards my retirement. I did that. Took me out of grad school, it took me about 10 months to find a federal job. And Alexandria was the first that gave me a solid offer. And so I jumped on it and came down here, and I've enjoyed myself ever since. It's been great. I graduated from California Lutheran University with a degree in economics, and my MS is in quantitative economics. So that's like econometrics, statistical forecasting, things like that. Finance too. I don't really use it anymore because we don't really do a whole lot of forecasting here. Most of the forecasting takes place back east. But yeah, that's that. So a history of USDA rural development. We weren't always called that. In the 30s, we were called the Farmers Resettlement Administration. It was FDR, his administration during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, when obviously farmers were having a very tough time back in the Midwest. They made a whole bunch of what they called these ABC, not divisions, agencies to help out during the Depression. So the Farmers Resettlement Administration was used for taking rural farmers that were affected by the Dust Bowl, and then what they were doing is they were moving them off the rural land and putting them into planned communities. And I don't think it really ever took off. There were a couple of these planned communities I know of because there was one in Ohio, and they all started with G. There was another one I know of because my mom grew up there in Greendale, Wisconsin. And you can see they lined everything out in a grid. They had these little homes, they call them Greendale Originals now, and they're only like 900 square feet, but they go for a crazy amount of money just because people come and buy them and they remodel them. It's an interesting concept. It just never took off like nationwide like it was supposed to. So after the Depression, we kept splintering. We became the Farmers Home Administration, which was the USDA's financial arm for really everything financial. So it was farm loans, crop insurance, rural development was a part of it at the time. So the big portion of that, rural development had home loans, business loans, community facilities loans. The FSA, the Farm Service Agency, was doing crop loans. The Risk Management Agency was doing crop risk insurance. Well, anyways, as time went by, all those splintered out into their own things. The FSA, farm loans, and the Farmers Home Administration stuck together until the 90s, to when we split off. The FSA became its own thing. So rural development, at that point, it became named that in around 2006. We kept home loans in rural areas, business programs in rural areas, and then community facilities. I work in business programs, so what we do for the most part is we're trying to help with the expansion of rural business and the creation of jobs is really our main part. But rural development as a whole continues to work together really just to improve the quality of life in rural areas. What that means in Louisiana, and really anywhere else around the country, is for business programs, that's a city of less than 50,000 people. So 90%, probably more, of the area in Louisiana counts, except for obviously Shreveport, Lafayette, Lake Charles, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans. And also what we call the outside of that, the word for it, or the phrase, is called the contiguous urbanized area around those cities, which is, it's really, it has to do with population density as it radiates out from these cities. So we have at our website rd.usda.gov, you can actually put in addresses and it'll tell you if that area is eligible or not. That's pretty easy. If you can't figure it out, you give me a call.
Did you say cities of populations,
Over.
not parishes?
No, it's not parish.
It's
It's
cities.
cities. So it's really, like I said, Louisiana, it's those 5 cities that I named off, and then
Yeah.
sometimes a little bit on the outskirts of it.
Right.
And the mapping tool shows that. It looks like a map like Google Maps. You put in an address, and if it's yellow, it's ineligible. If it just looks like the rest of the map, it's eligible. And you can do it by an exact address, even if it won't pick up the exact one. If you get close enough to it, you can zoom in, whatever. You can just look. But yeah, it's cities, not parishes. So yeah, our mission now, like I said, is improving the quality of life in rural areas. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, we talk about city population. What is the minimum required population per city?
50,000.
50,000?
Anything over 50,000 is ineligible. And it goes according to
Something less 50,000?
Then it's eligible, yes. And it goes according to the census, whatever the most recent census is. So it gets redrawn, as time goes on. So when 2020 comes around, Alexandria is right in the cusp. We're at about 48,500 people. If when we do the 2020 census, Alexandria has somehow gone above 50,000, which I doubt though, because its population has been pretty static the last long time. If it did though, then that would become ineligible as well.
Well, I would think it's better for a city than a parish, because a parish is probably going to be larger, right?
Right, of course.
Yes, it's very city. Yeah, it's more cities, more down.
Right.
And Washington Parish is more.
Right, yeah, for population size, we're talking about what's eligible. Now, and I guess let me backtrack a little bit. So business programs is one thing, and I'm not an expert in the other programs, but I can pitch them here really quick. We also do home loans too. So we have direct guaranteed loans from the USDA for residential properties as long as it's under a certain population threshold, which I think for that one though it's 25,000, because I know Alexandria is eligible for business programs, but not for housing. We have our direct loan guarantee program direct loan program, where very low interest, but it's according to income. So only low income is eligible for that. We have a guaranteed home loan program where you actually get your mortgage from a bank, and then we guarantee it in case of default. And that is from low to moderate income. It starts phasing out, I think, 150%. Don't quote me on this because, like I said, I don't work in the program, but it's about 150%, I think, of a family of 4's federal poverty level. But that's something you can check on too. So really, if anyone's looking for a home in a rural area too, it's beneficial to check that out. Yes?
About for agricultural lands.
As far as, like where it would.
Give a loan for buying land for agriculture.
Well, see,
for make a farm.
And this is where we start crossing with the FSA, because really, and you can blame bureaucracy or whatever, but the USDA has about 16 major subdivisions, rural development being one of them. The Farm Service Agency, like I was talking about, that split off from us, they handle most of the row crop and the agricultural production lending. So when it comes to actual farmland or ranching land, the farm loans are where that comes into play. So it's the FSA, and their state office is in Alexandria as well, but they have parish offices. It used to be that every single parish had an office and an FSA board, but they've kind of consolidated it now, so it just depends on where you are. But USDA Rural Development can do loans for what we call harvesting, so whether that's timber, nurseries, fishing and shrimping, we can do that, but actual ranching, animal ranching, and row crop production, we can't do. Unless, there's always a catch too. And I get into that more when we get to the loan program. But if you're doing an overall project and the FSA can't do your agricultural side, if you're doing something integrated, like let's say you raise cattle and you want a processing facility as well, you want to build, finance, as long as the land and the livestock is less than 50% of the total project and the rest of it is for that processing facility, we can finance that. if the FSA, as long as it's less than half, and the FSA can't do it. But you're doing it in conjunction with some sort of processing facility. Now, the largest part of our portfolio is our home loans. I mean, we do way more of that, way more residential lending than we do business. But Louisiana is very active in our business loan, our commercial lending. I just got off the conference call with Washington D.C. today. Last year, we did 1.2 billion in commercial lending guarantees, and Louisiana had 120 million. We had 10%. So we did the Louisiana. My office did 10% of that entire program's loans in 1 year. So we're very active. We've done a lot of since oil hit its nadir in 2015, around like less than $30 a barrel. It's come back up now. It's kind of stagnating, but it's come back up. So we've seen a lot of oil and gas service companies coming back to get refinanced through us. So we've seen a lot of that. We've seen a lot of hotels because they were overbuilt a little bit after the recession up until now. And so a lot of hotels were folding, so now we see a lot of people coming in and buying them on the cheap and then coming to us because banks are kind of wary of the hotel industry. Any questions? So these are the 4 main programs I'll go over today. I only have pamphlets on the value-added, the Rural Energy for America program, the REAP program, and then I have some for the actual business and industry loan guarantee. Actually, can we go around the room real quick? Have you guys give just a quick introduction of what brought you here? Go ahead.
My name is Jordan Banthwell, and I run a company here in New Orleans called All You Need. We mostly do edible nursery stock, but we also do a lot of workshops and educational programming.
Angelina Harrison, I'm the Director of Markets for the Crescent City Farmers Market. I came to see what kind of resources I could pass on to our network of growers, and also to see if any of them would apply to organizations like ours that provide support for those growers.
Sure.
Jonathan Mall, run a seafood, shrimp and crab operation.
All right.
Carmen Johnson of the German Coast Farmers Market. Same thing as you just said for our farmers, what we could probably bring back for them, and also for us, how we can grow.
Sure.
In Montgomery with the General Response Market.
Okay.
My name is Ismael Herrera. I'm a farmer, and I open a inspecting meat processing plant right now.
My name is Adrian Herrick. I work with the Latino Farm Outreach Program in Louisiana and Mississippi. So again, I'm just kind of learning what resources to pass along to our county.
Well, that's good. Are you a nonprofit?
No.
No. Okay. Well, because that would have been a nice segue to this. So this is a rural business development grant, and you read the name, and they should change the name because it's a very common misconception. When I'm not out here doing outreach or analyzing and underwriting loans and closing loans, I answer phones at my office, and we get a lot of calls about this because people see the name and they call and they say, well, I would like to get a business grant. And I tell them I'd like to get a business grant too, because if there were grants to start up a business, and it's a common misconception. It's not that they don't exist, because there are private foundations that do that sort of thing, depending on what your business is and how it fits their mission. But I don't want to say the sad truth, but the truth of most federal grants, and it's not all of them, because I have a couple here that break this rule, usually only go to certain eligible recipients, and that's nonprofit organizations whether that's community development, which is what I normally work with, or health, education, whatever can fit into a 501c3 nonprofit organization, or a municipality. So we'll give them. We've even done it for the state because we've done it for LED, Louisiana Economic Development, parishes, counties, cities, that sort of thing, or institutions of higher learning. So we'll give them out to universities and 2-year colleges. And the fourth is Indian tribes. So the grant itself can't go to a for-profit business. It doesn't go directly to them. How it works is this grant, the Rural Business Development Grant, and like I said, this is true with most federal grants. So we give it to what we call an intermediary. About half the time that is a nonprofit, like I said, community development organization, a development district like we have in Louisiana. And what they do is they take those funds and they provide services then to businesses, whether that's entrepreneurial training or job skills training, helping write a business plan, that sort of thing. An idea of when we give it to a city, like we've given them to downtown development districts, things like that, like Hammond has one, where they're downtown there, we gave them money to start up a relending program. So we give them $200,000 and they in turn lend that out at usually very low interest to other small businesses. We had probably 24 of those across the state at one point, but they've been dwindling just because, over time, either they revolved their money and they returned it, or just mismanagement and a lot of bad loans got made. It's not to say all of them did, some of these programs have a bad track record. But there's successful ones too. I mean, the idea is that's what they were doing. Or we could give money to a city that they buy a piece of real estate and then they lease it out to a business on attractive terms so that they can bring a new company into their town, that sort of thing. This grant. So like I said, that's who it's eligible for. It's for the help of really what our main mission is. It's the same idea, to help small and emerging business and also to create jobs. So normally, like I said, that's through training. We offer this once a year. It's a statewide competition. There's no minimum or maximum on this grant. We typically see between $50,000 and $200,000 is what the typical grant award is. The grant period is usually about a year, depending on if it's something like construction or something. Construction will do it longer. But for what I was talking about, like skills training or entrepreneurial training, we try to limit that to 1 year. So I say between 50 and 200,000, but it all depends, because we've given some out for more than that, close to $500,000. It just depends on what the project is and how they score. We have our own internal scoring model that, depending on where the project is, what they're going to do, if they have any matching funds into it, they all get scored and ranked. The highest scoring, get preference, and then that's who gets the money. We typically, like I said, we have one deadline for this every year. It's usually in May, so either late April or early May. The time frame shifts every year, but it's usually right around that time. So the sky's the limit with this one, though. As long as you're an eligible entity, you can do almost everything with it. I mean, from real estate to equipment to relending funds, like I said, really almost anything you think of. What the list of what you can't use it for is much shorter than what you can. But again, if there's one thing to take away from this, is that it can't go to a for-profit business, and it is deceiving. And I wish we would change the name, but I don't think that's happening anytime soon. Big government can tend to move slow when we're talking about big level policy and things like that in the name of programs. But I guess a little picture out there of Louisiana Pecans. We gave a grant to the Louisiana Pecan Growers Association, and they were using that, because they're a nonprofit, to train their own members on how to cultivate pecans, and also people who were hoping to get into the business. Any questions on that grant? So yeah, Louisiana, it was the most that this grant had ever been funded. Last year, nationwide it was 30 million, Louisiana got 750,000. And I think we spread that out over about five projects. This is probably of some interest if you're farming or if you're involved with farmers, as some of you had said. We call this a value-added producer grant. And this is a grant that is a matching grant for agricultural producers or harvesters, so it can be, like I said, timber, nurseries, fishing, shrimping, and then we can do row crop production for this. So really anything that an agricultural producer is producing, as long as they're making a value-added product from it. So the way you can do that is in 4 different ways. The biggest one is called a change in physical state, where let's say you're, growing peanuts and turning it into peanut butter, or cottonseed oil, or cotton and yarn, or something like that, where you're actually taking the product and turning it into another something derived from it. The second one is the way that it's produced that gives it value. So mainly when we think of that, we're thinking organic, or it could be grass-fed beef, or free-range chicken, something that the way that you're producing it sets it apart. Now, that doesn't have to be a change in state now, just because that's what you're adding the value from. The third one is local food. So if you say, what's adding the value to this is that it's local. So if you say this is, local, this is Louisiana crawfish, that's what's adding the value to it. This is Gulf shrimp, that's adding the value. As long as you're selling it, that product within 400 miles or within the state of where you harvest it, it can count as a local food. But you have to market it that way. You have to say, this is Louisiana made, blah, blah, blah. What this grant can do is it's saying it doesn't pay for fixed assets. So it can't do equipment, real estate, vehicles. It pays for some labor costs, as long as it's not the grantee. Like, if you go and you're the farmer and you apply for this grant, it won't pay your salary, it won't pay you to go out into the fields or out to harvest, but it will pay for you to hire additional labor to do it. It'll pay for the processing, anything that goes along with the processing. Not the building or the equipment, but utilities, packaging, transportation, things of that nature, not any fixed assets, but the things that go into you producing this, processing it, and then getting it to the the end user, the market. It is up to $250,000. It's a 1-to-1 match. So and it's reimbursable. All of our grants are that way too. So even the one I was talking about last slide, for a nonprofit, we don't give advances. The money isn't up front. What happens is the nonprofit or whoever, or in this case the processor, brings us valid receipts at the end of the month or whenever they decide they want to get reimbursed, and then we reimburse from that. So these are all reimbursement grants, they're not advancements.
So that included pay labors on the farm?
Right, as long as it's not to the grantee though. Or, so if you're hiring additional labor, like here, for instance, at the crawfish processing place right here, they were hiring H2A workers, agricultural workers to come and help process, that we would pay that, the payroll for that, half of it anyway. Because like I said, it's a 1-to-1 matching, so
Yeah.
when that reimbursement comes in, we just split it down the middle and then reimburse that price, or whatever you paid. So yeah, it'll do labor. As long as it's not, like if you apply for the grant, you can't use the grant funds to pay yourself. But you can use it direct.
Pay labors on the farm, employees
Yes.
on the farm.
Mhm.
Because my farm is in season the whole year. I produce meat,
Right.
pork, so it's the season the whole year.
Yeah. Well, this grant will go up for, you can keep drawing the money, obviously, until it's gone, or up to 3 years. So when we see the application for this, we want to see the outline, or the budget, have this budgeted in for up to 3 years. It doesn't have to be 3, but 3 is the most. So like I said, whether that's, packaging, processing costs, utilities, shipping, all those sorts of things will pay, but it can't be for fixed assets, so.
Livestock,
Well, I'd have to get back to you, but I think it does for additional input. Like if you were to, what you need to make your value-added product, like if you had to go and buy more livestock, or you were going to in turn process, then yes. So another positive part of this is that $250,000 that the grantee has to put up doesn't have to be in just straight cash. It helps because this, again, is a competition. It's scored, but it's not done here in the state. What we do is we get the application, and once we see that it's eligible, the person, the producer is eligible, their product is eligible, their budget, everything looks good as far as eligibility. It gets into kind of a subjective scoring where it might be me, it might be somebody else in my office. We look over, we have like a guideline. We look over these different parts like, financial, sustainability, management, suitability, blah, blah, blah. And we score it based on like a range. It'll say, what do you think between 5 and 25 that this portion of it is worth? And they give us some guidelines to it, like does it say this, does it say that? And then, but there's usually a range, like the minimum, and then what you think subjectively, how, as a reviewer, how do you feel about it? So we take those, it's about 5 parts, add it up, send it up to Washington, D.C., and then they have 2 more independent reviewers, they call them. And it's usually somebody from academia, like a professor who's in the agribusiness or something like that. And 2 other ones, they go ahead and they score these projects on their own too. So then we take all 3 of those scores, and then you take the average, and then that is stacked up across the entire country. And the ones that have scored the most are the ones that get funded. Last year, we actually combined this for 2017 and 2018 because it was taking so long to go through the process. And we awarded, it was close to 300 and some projects worth like $40 million. Maybe a little bit slightly over that. The year before that, 2016, we did 44 million. So it's, yeah, go ahead.
so you said for 2017-18 budget, how many projects you sent it to Washington?
It was about 300 that got approved. That were sent in was a little bit over 400.
400, they have 300 approved?
That got approved. That got, well, that's not the overall approval because some that were, I don't have numbers on how many were deemed ineligible, but out of the eligible ones, yeah,
Okay.
there was about 400 submitted. It was like 410 or something like that, and about 300 got funded.
Where's the critical point to make it they reject the application for receive the grants?
Well, it's usually ineligibility, and the ones that we see the most are where either the project itself, just when the person put in the grant, they weren't quite sure on what their product was supposed to be, and it really wasn't. It didn't qualify as a value-added product. Like just one off the top of my head, an applicant had put in that they were making jewelry out of rocks. That
Yeah.
it's not an agricultural product.
Exactly.
So, and I mean that's just a misunderstanding, and then it becomes ineligible. Other things too, because the producer, to qualify for this, they have to be growing at least 50% of the raw input into this. So if you're ranching, you have to be raising and providing 50% of the beef or the pork, whatever it may be. Same with any row crop production. We have most of the projects that we've done in the last 3-4 years have either been crawfish or shrimping, which I mean, because that's a big industry in Louisiana. We'd like to see it diversified a bit, but we want to get as many of these through as we can. This is a program that we try to push. It's not always successful just because of that matching element that comes into it. We had in Baton Rouge a group of sugarcane farmers who they distill rum. So I mean that was what they ended up doing. They got awarded that. So, I mean, really anything you can think of in an agricultural product, as long as you're producing 50% of it, can potentially be eligible for this program. This program doesn't have a rural restriction on it. You can be in an urban area with this. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was my question. So how many times can you apply for every?
You can only be awarded the grant once.
Okay.
You can apply for it every year. So I mean, you can apply for it until you get selected. And we try to be helpful with it. Like if we see a project that comes through and is eligible, and for whatever reason it didn't score high enough and it's right up, you know. So I've gone back to, for the next year for these guys and help them. Not really, I can't help them write it, but I mean, give them pointers on where they were weak and what they need to do, or really what area they need to shore up to come back next year. I mean, obviously I can't write for them, but I can tell them where the weaknesses were.
Yeah, this is my point. So I had the grant, say 1 year, and my project is coming to successful for the help for the grant, making my project successful.
Yeah.
So, but I say, well, this project growing, is there any way we can have another grant, make it more strong foundation where we go, or different type of grant program?
Well, this one is two-tiered though, and thanks for reminding me. For a value-added product that's actually going to be selling, starting up, or expanding, a requirement for this is a feasibility study. If you haven't been selling it for at least 2 years, and you don't have financials showing that you've been selling this value-added product for 2 years, and that you're trying to expand your market now. If you haven't done that, you have to have a feasibility study. Well, we have a grant that is the same thing. It's so-called the value-added producer grant. That's up to $75,000. It's a match grant as well, where you can apply to pay for that plan, for that study. And that one you can do, and then also come back for the $250,000 worth.
That was about 75,000.
Yeah, up to. I don't know what kind of feasibility study costs that much money.
Doesn't the Louisiana Small Business
They,
Development
and I'll talk about them too. Yeah, the LSBDC helps with business plans, and they can refer for feasibility studies. They won't go and do a full-blown feasibility study though, just because it's a bit more involved with than a business plan. I mean, most of the time it has to do with projections and probably regression analysis and things like that the LSBDC. I know they don't do it, but I don't think they'd have the resources to do it, even if they wanted to. It's just, it's pretty involved. But yeah, they don't, I've never, because I do a lot of commercial lending, and with our startups, we need feasibility studies for most we get them for all startups, and sometimes for expansions, but I've never seen one more than $7,000, so I don't know why we give out 75. Somebody's getting rich out of it. But, so yeah, so when I start with the matching portion of it again, one of the positives of this, it doesn't have to be all cash. I kind of got off on a tangent here saying that, okay, here's how we score, blah, blah, blah. But the matching portion of it can actually be the grantee, their time. So even though we can't pay them out of the proceeds of the grant, their salary, they can say that their time in the project, whatever they have to show us that what it was worth based on labor statistics, but they can say that is my match. I'm going to be putting in $40,000 worth of labor, or over those 3 years, you could times that times 3. So that can be 25% of it, so half of their half, and then the other 25% can be the value of the input that is going into the processing. So if you, over the course of this 3 years, you're saying that whether it's your row crops, your corn, soybeans, whatever, or your cattle, energy improvements. There's no actual set number for it, as long as whatever energy you're consuming at that point, if whatever you're installing now is less, then you can go ahead, get that after you put in the application, have that installed or done, and the USDA will reimburse 25% of that. So there's a lot of ways you can do that, whether it's equipment. We do a lot of diesel irrigation pumps where they're upgrading those to electric, which saves them energy. LED lighting, we do an awful lot of coolers in supermarkets and gas stations. It can be windows, it can be insulation, it could be really, but the big ones we do are lighting and the equipment like that. We've done poultry houses up north where they're putting in more efficient, cooling systems or blowers, things like that, and they get the grant that way. But same thing, the application comes in, they go out, they install the upgrade, as long as they're funded, we go out and inspect that it's actually there, and then the USDA cuts them a check for 25% of the total cost. This has 2 deadlines every year. This is a little bit different, it's not part of our budget, not our yearly budget, it comes out of the Farm Bill, which is passed through legislature a different way. We have the first round, which is grants of $20,000 or less, so that's a project of $80,000 or less, because we're talking about 25%, is at the end of October, so October 31st is the deadline. And then we have the next round, which is the rest of those smaller projects, and then the unlimited ones, because this grant will go up to $250,000, so 25% of the $1 million project. And that one is at the end of March. So we do it twice a year, and then we just do it every year after that. And like I said, really the big one for this is it's got to be a small business in a rural area or agricultural producer anywhere, and it's a refundable grant of 25%, up to $250,000 for the efficiency upgrade and $450,000 for the energy system. Do we have any questions?
So this one here is mostly for profit as opposed to the other one?
This, in fact, this one has to be for profit.
Okay.
Yeah.
One question, on the solar panels, that's also 25% reimbursable.
What's that?
The solar panels?
Yes, that's because a solar system, right? If you're, that would be 25% the reimbursement on that. A renewable energy system, that the method, yeah, solar is one of the approved ones, right? It would be a 25% reimbursement on the cost of that, the procurement and the installation. This is where I do the bulk of my work. This is our business and industry loan guarantee program. It's really our flagship program. Like I said, last year, nationwide, it's about $1.2 billion. And we're pretty proud of it. We did 10%, like I said, right here in Louisiana. I just got off the conference call today where this program, when President Trump first put out his budget 6 months ago, this program wasn't supposed to be funded. In fact, most of rural development wasn't supposed to be funded. We were on the chopping block. Obviously, the budget's a negotiation, and we got back on it somehow because we're funded for next year. And so we're going to have a $1.4 billion total for this coming year. It would be great if we could do 10% like that again. I don't know, just we've had some pretty big projects out of this. One that made the news was the Vidalia denim plant in Vidalia, Louisiana. It was an old Fruit of the Loom distribution center in Vidalia. After NAFTA happened in the 90s, most textile, well really the global economy as a whole, textile manufacturing in the United States, most of that was sent overseas. Not even overseas really, across the border as well. So it was just, labor was less expensive there, so I mean that's where a lot of the textiles were, textile manufacturing was happening. Manufacturing as a whole, really. So there was a group that came in to purchase that facility from the city, because Fruit of the Loom had moved out. They lost, I think at their peak, probably like 700 jobs or something like that in the mid-2000s. And these guys came in, it was a $25 million loan from us, a $5 million loan from the SBA, like a $8 million grant from the city on the purchase of the building, and about like $15 million in equity that these guys were bringing when they brought in. So a big project, like $60 million overall. And it's going to bring back, just in its first phase, like 400 jobs back to the Vidalia area that really needs it. I mean, these aren't minimum wage jobs, these are it's a nice step towards a manufacturing job where it's a lot higher than what would be typical in that area. And then, I mean, that was our big one from last year, but like I said, we did a lot of oil and gas service stuff, a lot of hotels. I did a vet clinic. I mean, we're always looking for really anything. I mean, we're really trying to get this loan program out there. This is the same thing. It's got to be in a city of less than 50,000 people, or that contiguous urbanized area that I was talking about. And this is a loan guarantee, so it's not a direct loan from the USDA. Even though the borrower is responsible to the USDA, the loan itself is just guaranteed. So what happens is borrower goes into a bank or a credit union, so we can do anybody who's state or federally chartered. So that's really any bank or credit union you can see. We say that because we can also do non-traditional lenders, which are like CDFIs and smaller like loan funds or like equity firms, those sort of things that just lend money but they're not regulated. But the majority of them come from banks and credit unions. And the bank will approve it if it's eligible, in an eligible area for an eligible purpose, on the condition that the USDA gives its guarantee. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why lenders are a little hesitant to lend out in a rural area. I mean, the biggest one, obviously, is because, going back to economics, like the largest driver of demand is population, because you need to have people there to create demand for whatever your product or service is. So, of course, it's going to be less in a rural area. I mean, usually the education attainment is lower. There's a lot of reasons. So, I mean, banks are a little bit more hesitant to go into a rural area. So that's why we're here to incentivize them to continue to do it. So what we're trying to do is have banks lend more and more often in a rural area, because clearly there was a need for it. Because if not, the banks weren't opening their purse strings to do it. Go ahead.
That time the loan, FHA, they be available to give you the loan for that kind of projects?
I don't know how, to be honest, I don't know how FSA lending even works. Like if it's a guarantee or if they do direct lending.
Yeah,
I'm not
directly
sure.
loan.
They do both.
They do
They do, yeah, they do both. They do guarantee or directly loan.
Okay. And I guess I should probably read more about it then, in case I get any questions. But yeah, then if it is, most of the guarantee programs across the federal government are very similar. Like the SBA's is pretty similar to ours. It's just loan amounts is the difference in where they can do it. Like the SBA can do it across the entire state. We can only do it in the rural areas. The loan sizes, I think SBA caps out at $5 million. We can do, under the right circumstances, up to $25 million, like I said, with the Vidalia program. And we can even go, actually, to $40 million if a cooperative is involved. So, and that's something we don't see a whole lot of in Louisiana either, the co-op style of business. The USDA has been pushing for that for a long time because it is beneficial to the co-op members. It just seems like the cooperation where getting enough people together to form one has been kind of a challenge. But we can do that as long as, yeah, it's a local food project. Like we're speaking with dairy farmers while trying to do something like that, because that's obviously been milk prices have been a real strain on smaller dairy operations for a while now, and it's kind of coming to a head, especially with the tariffs that have come in place. And just and I talk about this all the time too, the tremendous oversupply of milk, just because preferences have changed over time. Went from just the demand for milk just going down over time anyway, because people just weren't drinking as much fluid milk, to having so many other choices like soy milk or almond milk. But it's just that the demand isn't there so much for it. So we're kind of seeing a shift to where the small dairy farmers kind of getting phased out. But at the time, right now, we're still trying to help them. So, where was I? Okay, so what we do is we give a guarantee to we tell the full faith and credit of the United States government is guaranteeing this bank that in the the case of an insolvency of a business, if the bank is going to take a loss after they sell the collateral, whatever that loss is, we'll pay a certain percentage of what that bank's loss was. So let's say you have a $2 million loan, the company goes bankrupt, they go in, they sell their collateral, the bank gets back $1 million of it, now we still have $1 million sitting out there. So we had an 80% guarantee on it. The USDA, this is basic, because I mean there's a lot of other fees and things that come into it, but we reimburse that bank $800,000. So they're covered way more than they would be if they were to go on blind, obviously. So, like I said, what we're trying to do is get banks to lend more and more often in rural areas. We have, this is a tiered thing, so up to $5 million we'll guarantee it at 80%, up to $10 million we'll do it at 70%, and up to that 25 million, I guess even up to 40 if it's a co-op, we'll guarantee it at 60%. There are some things that will get us to lower that guarantee slightly, like if there's construction involved, we'll usually lower it about 5%. It depends on how risky the credit is, because we always have the option to lower that percentage, but normally we leave them at the maximum like that, according to the loan limit. What a business can do with the money, the loan proceeds, it's really almost anything you think of in a commercial aspect: real estate, equipment, working capital lines, inventory. The only one we really can't guarantee is a line of credit. We can refinance, so we can refinance a line of credit too, where if they come to us with $1 million on their line, we can term that out for them and put that into a term loan, like a long-term loan. But we can't guarantee a line of credit. Say, okay, bank, give them $1 million line of credit, we'll put a guarantee on that too. That's one thing we can't do. The big projects where the uses, other than just those general slots that we can't do, are like, so we can't do row crop production or farm land. We can do all other types of commercial real estate. We can't do residential stuff either, because that would be our housing division. Or apartment complexes, because that goes into our multifamily housing division. So, and really the only businesses we can't do are what they call anything of a prurient sexual nature. So like adult bookstores or strip clubs. Can't do racetracks for whatever reason. Can't do golf courses for whatever reason that one is too. And gambling, as long as it's less than, if it's more than 10%. So we can do mini marts and things like that sell like scratch tickets or Powerball, but because that's going to be less than 10% of the revenue. But anything more than that, like casinos and things like that, we can't touch. Or anything that's against federal law too. So we can't do, even though some states have legalized marijuana, recreationally and medicinally, it's still a federal law that marijuana is illegal. So we can't do anything with that either.
What's the link to the terms and like interest rates?
Yeah, okay, so we can give a term based on what the loan is used for. So the proceeds, if it's for real estate or real estate improvements like buildings, whatever, we can go all the way out to 30 years, which is, I mean, that's the length of, normally the longest length of a residential mortgage. Most commercial lenders won't go that far, but with our guarantee they will. Equipment is 15, that's the maximum, or the useful life, but normally we try to make it as easy on the borrower as possible, and we'll do that maximum, as long as the collateral supports it. And then inventory, working capital, that is only 7 years. So what we'll do is though, when we get a loan package, typically you're gonna have a mix of all those things. So we call it a mixed term, where you just take the prorated share of each, and then you do it according to what it's going to be. So it's called a mixed term. If it's a really real estate heavy deal, yeah, we can get close to that 30 years. If the borrower is paying for like the fees and everything out of their pocket and only buying real estate, we can do the whole 30. It just depends on what it's going to be used for. The interest rate is negotiated between, because it's still given by the bank, it's between the borrower and the lender. So while there's nothing, the only thing our regulation says is it can't be unusually high. But On the positive side, the idea that the borrower is getting a guarantee and that they're eligible for it can give them some sort of leverage in those negotiations to get that interest rate lower. That's enough. We also score these for funds, because once we run out of money, which we do in Louisiana, because our state allocation last year was like $17 million. So we ran through that before they even gave it to us. Because like I said, we did 120 million. So once we get above that 17 million, we have to go to Washington, D.C. and request funds from the national pool. So once we start sending those up there, they do it based on score. And how a project starts scoring higher is on it's another internal scoring model, but part of that is how low the interest rate is from the bank. So if the bank wants some of these bigger deals to happen, or if they want them to happen at all when the funding is low, they'll do it at like 1% above prime, or 1.5% above prime, which is very low. And it's getting higher though, because the Fed just raised interest rates again, the federal funds rate, another 25 basis points, so 0.25% last meeting. And they plan on doing it about another 8 times, they say, over the next 2 years. So what I see typically is prime plus prime plus 2, prime plus 2.25. So we're at 5.25 right now. So around 7.25, 7.5 is where they are right now. That's probably gonna go up before we see them stop. Probably about another 2 percentage points. So 200 basis points. So we're gonna see interest rates probably stop somewhere around stop somewhere around 9.5, 10 by the time the Fed is done with this. It doesn't really matter because most commercial loans though are variable, where it says it's going to be prime plus whatever it is. So whenever they move that, your interest rate's going up anyway. Where that comes into play is if you're getting fixed rates on something, if you could lock in like 5% right now, or just lock in prime with nothing above it, and you'd be able to keep it low in a rising rate environment like right now. Like a mortgage, like if someone was thinking about going to get a house, well, last year was probably the best time to do it, but because that keeps moving up as well. They were at not all-time lows, but pretty low last year around this time. So yeah, so the interest rate is negotiable. Like I said, having that guarantee behind it should be beneficial to the borrower. The term is based on what the loan proceeds are going to be used for, and really, there's no minimum to this program. Loans for that are less than $600,000, we have kind of a streamlined process for it where not as much has to be submitted. The bank still has to keep all that stuff, but the USDA doesn't have to even see it for us to approve it. If it's less than $600,000, our typical loan, I think we average, it's about 3.3 million. So I mean, we do fairly large projects. I mean, it's not gigantic, but it's pretty big. And this we take year round. This startup's kind of the same with that value added. You need to have a feasibility study involved with it. The requirements for it really aren't that much more than what the bank is already going to be asking. Throughout processing to closing, the USDA at the most has about 10 additional forms. I mean, the application itself, a couple of assurance agreements, some things the bank has to sign, but not the borrower. But the big one for the borrower is and this is something I should mention, anybody who owns more than 20% of a business that is borrowing from here is going to have to sign a personal guarantee, where it's not going to be secured. Like you're not saying, okay, I'm putting my second mortgage on my house or a lien on my car, but you're personally guaranteeing it that if that loan goes bad, now that becomes a personal responsibility, whether it's a corporation or an LLC. And that becomes a debt to, after so many days, after, let's say the loan goes bad, goes delinquent, the bank seizes the collateral, forecloses on whatever the business had, and then the bank has a certain amount of time to go after because they're going to require a personal guarantee too. Most banks do now for a commercial loan. If they don't get either through a judgment or an attachment, through a legal process or a settlement from their guarantor, that now goes to the Department of Treasury, it becomes a federal debt, to where the Department of Justice would then go after that guarantor. And I'm not saying I have to scare anybody, but I mean, it's a reality of taking out a commercial loan now. Almost every single time, you're gonna have to, the principals of the company, any owners, are gonna have to put a personal guarantee down. Our turnaround for this stuff, we've been pretty busy lately, but we have 60 days for once we get a complete application from the bank. We were having a turnaround probably about 28 days from funding, or I mean from approval to funding to closing, once it got through the USDA. It's a little bit longer. We have up to 60 days. We've been kind of pushing that lately. But they changed things to where the national office where our funding wasn't, it used to be you just apply, you got approved here in Louisiana, we would put it up for funding, it would get funded. First come, first served basis. Now those scores I was talking about really came into play where they're only funding out of that national reserve 25 million in guarantees every 2 weeks. And they're only taking the top scorers, so that's where the scoring came into play. I'm not sure if they're going to continue that for next year. They might. It just depends. But that's really it in a nutshell. I mean, the application for this isn't really too in-depth. Like I said, it's not much more than what the bank would ask for. If you're an existing business, 3 years of historical financials, 2 years of forecast pro forma financials for the future, projections, credit reports, personal financial statements on the guarantors, a feasibility study if it's a startup, a business plan. I guess is a good time to bring this up. A business plan, regardless, whether you're a startup or an existing company. And I get calls like this all the time too, where someone will call and say, "Look, I want to start a business. I want a loan." I'll say, "Well, what do you do? How much money do you need?" And they don't know. They say, I don't know. Maybe, what can I get? Well, a bank's not going to take you seriously if you don't know really down to a dollar how much you're going to ask for, because they want to know what you're going to use that money for, and that you're going to be able to pay them back. So if you're ever starting to think about starting, even if you already have a business and you're going to be looking for financing, you have to sit down and do that business plan, which is your blueprint of really essentially how you're going to pay the bank back. And it just talks about your market, your management, your financials, your projections, things like that, and how you're going to make this, how you're going to be able to pay back that financing. To be able to find that, we have a guideline for what needs to be in one, but the SBA has at SBA.gov, they have great resources there. You can go there. They have courses, online courses that are free, guides on how to write a business plan. The LSBDC was brought up. That's the Louisiana Small Business Development Center. They're funded by the SBA, and they operate outside of colleges. So, like ULL has one, Monroe has one, I'm sure Natchitoches. They're all over, and you can go in there, and they're funded by the SBA, so it's free. People can go in, they'll help you write business plans. They'll help you with all sorts of things like that. Organizing your business, filing with the Secretary of State, all sorts of things. They're a great resource.
And SCORE does the same thing.
Oh, SCORE too.
Yeah. We're all funded by the same thing.
Yeah. So I mean, the resources are out there. It's just obviously you gotta put a little bit of work in it. Usually it goes without saying, but sometimes people decide they wake up one morning and say they're going to start a business, and it takes a little more than that. But
I have a question.
yeah, go ahead.
If we wanted to do like a little construction for a little processing area with a little commercial kitchen in the farm, would that fall into the real estate terms?
It would. Okay, so if you were trying to put a commercial kitchen up, it would fall. That would be real estate, because it's a real estate improvement. It's an actual building on it. That would count for 30 years. And I should probably mention this too. I think typically why we end up doing larger loans, like 3.3 million is our average, is because there's things that, like I said, that go into it. Regardless of the loan size, that feasibility study, if it's a startup, it's going to be required. It's going to cost couple $1,000s, we'll need depending on how much the real estate is, the building, if it's less than 100,000, we wouldn't need an appraisal. Anything more than that though, we would need an appraisal, which is more money. Any real estate we take as collateral, which would be that, we would need a phase 1 environmental study done, which is another $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. So the fees can quickly add up. And on top of that, the guarantee fee, and I'm not sure, like I said, I'm not trying to scare anybody away from it, just, I want to be honest about it, is 3% of the 3% of the guaranteed amount. So if you have $1 million loan, the guaranteed amount is $800,000 at 8%, and 3% of $800,000, $24,000. That's the fee that really the bank has to pay to get the guarantee. But the bank, 9 times out of 10, is going to pass that along to the borrower. So then that is something that can be rolled into the financing, but it's something that's charged on top of it. Then every year, to keep that guarantee in effect, the bank needs to pay 50 basis points, 0.5% of whatever the guaranteed principal is on December 31st. So whatever it is, the bank needs to pay that to us to keep the guarantee in effect. A lot of times they pass that on to the borrower too. I've seen where the bank pays it as well. I mean, it just depends on how you set the deal up. So, I mean, there are fees on it, and there's sometimes a lot of, depending on the deal too, a lot of extras that you have to pay to get to that closing point. But the same is true of commercial lending in general, because I mean, you're gonna find that the bank might require that stuff too, and a lot of times the bank is gonna have an origination fee that's on top of whatever the loan itself is. Then you're going to have legal fees for the closings. You're going to have an attorney with, for the titling and everything. So, lending's expensive. But.
And what about if it's, I mean, like, you're talking about, let's say, $24,000 in fees. That's something for a major project, right? But something like.
No, that would be $1 million. Yeah, so that would be on $1 million project, right? So, I mean, when we start talking about, things. And I don't want to discourage anybody from using the program if they're talking about a smaller amount, but right. If you're looking at something that I would say that's less than a couple $100,000, it would probably be better just to, the bank would stomach that much easier too without needing a guarantee because of the loan amount. I'm not saying that's small money, obviously, it's still a lot of money. I'm just saying relatively, just probably going just the route of either finding an SBA microlender or maybe even checking out the SBA because they routinely do loans that are around that size. You just have to look at all your options. And if the bank is ready to move ahead with the credit, usually without coming to us for a guarantee, a lot of times they'll just go ahead and do it without even needing our guarantee. So it's normally on the high dollar amounts. Depending on the industry, or if the credit decision is a little shaky in their mind, is when they'll go through the process with us. Because I mean, really, one of 3 things can happen. You can go into the bank, when we're talking about this program. The one that you don't want to happen, the bank can deny you. The other is the bank will approve you conditionally on getting a guarantee from us or the SBA, or they'll just move right ahead and work the loan with you, just a regular traditional bank loan. So it really just depends on the situation, obviously.
I guess I was just kind of looking between this type of loan versus the one from FSA. They have that microloan for $50,000, but we were looking at 75.
Right.
It's kind of like the max, but we don't want to be short.
Short either, right?
So we're debating, and it's very attractive that it's the 30-year, we want to pay it off, of course, way before that, but FSA is 7 years, and it's 3.5%, so.
Yeah, right, well, yeah, no, and
which one do we want?
Well, they're doing it 3.5%?
Well, that's the latest brochure that I saw.
Yeah.
I just got it as a PDF, it says 3.5%.
That's what, because I think they have subsidized rates like that, which that's a great, that is a really great interest rate, but yeah, 7 years.
It's 50,000. So, And then the fact that you can pay monthly or once a year, and that's very attractive, you know.
Well, we can work that out. I mean, we let the lender take the lead on most of the particulars of the loan. Like if the lender is comfortable with an annual payment, we'll let them do that. I mean, most of the time, we're pretty flexible about it. So I mean, what the lender is looking at doing is what we'll normally go ahead with. The same thing with terms too. Like if the lender obviously has to, for that entire 30 years, they'd have to request it too though. They'd have to be comfortable with doing that whole 30 years. Which normally, like I said, with their guarantee though, they are, because I mean, it's there. So, I mean, that's that.
And it's a long time. I mean, it's not like a house, you know, that you probably live there, but, you know,
Right.
in commercial, yeah, it's a bigger risk.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is. I mean, in a commercial loan, you're going to have prepayment penalties too, similar to, you know, some mortgages have as well, but they're normally, most commercial loans I see, the longest I ever see it, well, I've seen 10, but I mean, typically they're 5. Prepayment penalties stop after the 5th year. I guess some of the other particulars, like we don't have any underwriting regulations on guarantors, so like credit scores, don't get me wrong, in real life they matter, and well, this is real life too, but we don't have in our regulations saying a guarantor has to have like a 700 credit score or something like that. It's all just one piece of the larger credit decision puzzle. So I mean, I've seen some pretty low ones come through guarantors for us and get approved. Like I said, it just all depends on the deal.
What happened with the grants for the value-added product? When you think this coming by the budget 2019?
For value added? They didn't. I had to leave to come here, so I didn't get to sit through the whole thing. So I didn't hear the value added portion of it. But typically, before we had this, the last 2 years put together, where the deadline was January 31st or something, we were seeing it pretty regularly around the end of June, early July.
Open the window for...
That'll be the deadline. So they'll put out the Federal Register, and that's something you can monitor. You can monitor our website too. It'll say when we start accepting applications or when the federal notice comes out, because the federal government produces and publishes this thing called the Federal Register, and it shows when these programs are coming out, you know, what the regulations are that are, you know, behind them, and that's when they put that out for release, that's when they'll say, okay, we're accepting applications from now until, you know, like I said, July 1st.
Where's the website we can follow for
the value added? Well,
when the application is open.
Oh, well, that's what we don't know until they say, like I said, typically though, it's like July 1st, so usually it's like 90 days before that.
Okay.
So probably sometime in the spring. I would say probably March.
Okay.
And I mean, but things are always up in the air, but I mean, going on history, that's usually when it's been.
No, but I say, how we can follow that through to you, website to your office or?
Oh yeah, no, you can, okay, so there's a couple ways you can do that to file it. You can go to grants.gov, and that's completely electronic, and you fill it in that way, and I think you can upload things to it, but I've never used it myself, but I've heard that it's kind of difficult. But what's easier than that, if you can either take everything, print it out, and mail it to my office directly, the address that's on that card, or if you just convert it all to a PDF or something like that, you can email it to me. And you don't have to go through like the grants.gov portal or anything like that. You can email, you can do it all paperless, just email it right to my email address.
Yeah, okay.
And then we can go from there.
We need to know when the application is open.
I print out a lot of stuff, so. And so we still haven't gone all the way digital either. We keep file cabinets full of paper. It's pretty wild. In 2018. Any other questions on this one? Any credit questions in general? Banking questions?
So if I have a project, I need to buy the land and do the building so I can apply to a new program for industrial loans, or I need to buy the land for agricultural project and build.
If, like I said, if you're bundling that, if you're making some sort of integration with that processing plant that you've been talking about, as long as the land that you're talking about for the grazing or for the ranching and whatever animals you're going to put on it is less than 50% of that total project. So if you're looking for a $2 million loan, That's gotta be just, 999,000, like cents of it, and the rest of it has to be for that processing
For
plant
the
and
process
the equipment. Right.
Right.
And we're always looking for food projects like that, so, I mean, yeah, we're all for it. We don't see enough of them, really.
Okay.
Anything else?
You were mentioning something about the value-added producer grant, about matching funds, and like the matching funds coming from the farmer side of the applicant side. There's something about like sweat equity in there?
Right, well, it's the idea that the labor of the grantee, not any labor that they're going outside to hire, like I said, like if they're hiring additional laborers, that can count towards it. So if they put that in their budget, they're saying that, look, on a weekly basis, that might be their full-time job. I mean, okay, I'm putting in 40 hours a week doing this, and if they can look at labor statistics from the Department of Labor and say, this is what I'm doing, this is what the prevailing wage is for this. You multiply that by how many hours they're saying they're gonna put into it, and that can count as their match, yes.
Okay, but like when it comes to ranking, and let's say they're calling 50% of the funds match, that's the maximum amount.
Right, well, that's what it has to be, right? So that, like I said, it's a 1-to-1, so whatever the grant amount is, that match has to equal it.
Right.
And as the thing with that is, though, actual cash is gonna get a higher score than if someone else. I mean, but it doesn't mean that, because I've seen them approved where people don't have any cash into it. It depends on the merits and the strength of the project and what they're doing. So you don't have to have cash. Like I said, it helps in the score, but you don't have to. It can be that, like the actual labor, and it can be the cost, the market cost of the input. So, I mean, there's ways to do it without having to spend or putting up any cash at that point. But there's always something to remember about that. It's like I said, it's a reimbursable grant, so you have to have working capital because you have to have the money to spend it, to be able to show us these receipts to get your reimbursement. So, it's just, I mean, we see a lot of interesting projects over there.
So I can get a loan for FHA, like a working capital, use the money or cover all the expenses, which I have the approval for the grants, and use the money cover expenses, present the receipt, and through to the grant, receive money back and pay the loan.
Well, this is another thing about that. The cash match for that grant, if you were to go get a loan from the FSA, it can't be federal money. So an FSA loan wouldn't count. If you were to go get a line of credit, though, from a bank without a federal guarantee or something, that would count.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to actually be your cash. If you were to go get a $250,000 line of credit, give us the approval letter from whoever, Bank of America, whatever it is, that can count as your cash match, as long as it is not federal money, federal dollars.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to make it work. I mean, the biggest problems I always see with it are, the product being produced doesn't count as being eligible, or the one even more than that is the applicant isn't actually producing the input. They're either buying it, or really, most of the time they're buying it and they're making a product. They're not the actual producer. This grant is for agricultural producers.
Yes. I didn't much.
All right, there's my contact info. It looks a lot like the business card. In fact, I think it looks just like that.
That's great.
Thank you very much.
Just give me an email or give me a call. That's our main office line, 7960. If I don't answer, which half the time I will, if I don't, they'll just ask for me and they'll forward it to my.
I guarantee something, he always returns a phone call
Thank you. You know, I tried, I really do.
Yeah, he was returning, he no answer, he returned the phone call.